Welcome to the Humble Hoof Podcast. My name is Alicia Harlov. This is a podcast for both horse owners and hoof care professionals, offering discussions into various philosophies on the health of the hoof and soundness of your horse. Please check us out on Facebook or at thehumblehoof.com. I became interested in track systems when my gelding Vinny was diagnosed with navicular disease and soft tissue damage. Through some online searches, I found the idea of track system rehab facilities, and my obsession began. Track systems are a different way of turnout and living for horses, where the paddocks are formed into paths with fencing, various surfaces, and even things like obstacles to encourage the horse to move more. The feed or hay is placed far from the water or shelter, for example, to encourage the horse to travel these paths with their herds. What many of us have seen with track systems is the byproduct of this continual movement in a herd. Horses with hoof-related soundness issues, such as laminitis, navicular, underrun heels, broken back angles, and other distortions and pathologies, improve rather quickly on a track-style setup. Through my interest in track systems, I stumbled upon Gawsworth Track Livery, run by Bethan Summers. She takes in a variety of rehab cases onto her track, and I reached out to her to talk to us about tracks. I actually don't even really know this story. I know bits and parts of it, but can you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in lameness rehabilitation?
Okay, so when I met my partner, we met on a traditional livery yard, and he moved his horse back to the family farm. And I went there, we were dating, and I went to the farm, and he said, "Oh, yeah, I want to do a livery yard one day." And I said, "Right, okay." But then I was so disillusioned with the traditional livery yard. And so I found, I can't even remember where I'd seen about track systems. I don't even remember, but we were on a night out one night, we were we'd had one too many to drink, should I say. And I said, "Oh, I've seen this system, you know. We're in a nightclub, really loud music, sat on this sofa." And I was like shouting into his ears, "I've seen this system." And he was like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, these horses live around the edge on a track, and it's surfaced. And they eat hay." Because what it was, my father-in-law was complaining that the horses were churning, like traditional farmers do. "Oh, the horses are churning up the grass and they're making a mess." And my partner was like, "Oh, why didn't you tell me about this before?" And I said, "Well, it's a barefoot thing. And my horse was barefoot, but his wasn't." And I said to him, I said, "Oh, I thought you'd think I'd be one of these, you know, I'm already a barefoot hippie. I didn't want you to think I was any more crazy than you already thought I was." He says, "No, that's a great idea." So the actual question about lameness rehabilitation, that really wasn't it wasn't the first thought. We just wanted to do a track system, and we thought of it more as a weight loss solution than for lameness. And I did, like I say, my horse was barefoot, but I didn't really have any kind of idea about barefoot rehab or the benefits of it. My horse was barefoot because I'd had some surgery and I wasn't riding, so I'd taken her shoes off, and I just never got round to putting them back on, and she always seemed okay. So I never bothered. So anyway, we created the track, and we noticed, well, there's a community with track systems, and also that leads into that barefoot horses, and then it's a natural progression. Then you see the benefits of barefoot and what it can do, and then it does seem to fix lameness issues. So kind of fell into it, if you like.
Yeah. And obviously, you know, I love track systems. I hope to have a track system type facility someday. But a lot of people, this might be the first time they're ever hearing about it. So can you explain what a track system is and maybe some of the appeal of it to those of us that have utilized it?
So a track system can be as simple as you've got your field and you just put an inner fence. So the horses live on the perimeter of the field, and you would have hay stations, and you would typically have the hay the furthest point away from the water and other resources like shelter, minerals, and then you can add all kinds of enrichment things like scratching posts, sand pits, lots of other things. So, but the basic is you'd have an inner perimeter fence, which would create a track around the edge, and you would have the hay stations dotted about, but you would always try and keep the water the furthest point away, as horses naturally in the wild would move up to 30 miles a day in search of resources, trekking for food, to water, to minerals, to shelter, things like that. And so that would be the basic track system.
Yeah. And I know that you've had, at least 2 different facilities now. And how have you set it up in the past? Do you usually do like just the perimeter fencing, or have you done other configurations?
So originally, our first track, it's quite tricky over here in the UK. We are bound by a lot of planning laws and restrictions. You can't just go chucking, for a basic grass track, a dirt track, you don't need any planning permission. But to put surfaces down, depending on where you are in the country, most local councils do require planning permission. So our original track was just the perimeter around a field, and our current one now is the track around the perimeter of the field. And then this is just our temporary one. And then the next one, the first plan, is just going to be a perimeter track. But then we are going to progress further to doing different configurations and adding in different pathways. So the first one was going to have extensions to it, but that never happened. But it just shows that you can have just a perimeter track and still be very successful with rehabilitation, weight loss, getting horses moving and seeing the results you're after. You don't have to have fancy configurations. I've seen pictures of tunnels and bridges and water features, steps. Oh, we have had steps on the first one, all kinds of different things, but it is not absolutely essential.
Yeah. And what kind of decision goes into like how wide to make that perimeter fencing?
So if you're having a grass track, which eventually the whole point of a track system is for it to become grass free. So I feel that if you're doing a grass track, you don't want it too wide because the grass will keep coming through. You need the traffic over the ground to wear away the grass, but then you've also got to take into consideration how many horses you have got. So you've got to find the balance between wearing the grass away, but also it's got to be safe. So say if you've just got 2 horses of your own at home and it's a dirt track, you can have that track, some of the main runs of it 2 or 3 meters wide, and because you've got your own horses and they've lived together for however long and it's safe, the horses get on, you're okay with that. But then you'd want the feeding areas and your corners and loafing areas where they maybe rest and play and roll. You could have that wider. Some people have it as big as menageries, big loafing areas, but you do want wider bits so they can roll around and play. So the corners, you could have like 8 meters. But again, if you're not surfacing it, and why you're looking for a track system is for a grass-free life, you need to take into consideration if that grass is going to be worn away. There's no point in doing it and then you have corners of lush green grass growing through, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, you said that you started it originally for your horses and weight management, right? So how did it sort of spill into having rehab horses?
We were always going to do a livery, and it was just going to be, I just imagined it would be lots of fat little ponies just running around, and that would be it. That would what we would offer, and that would be the only benefit. I didn't, and obviously horses living free in a herd and having the choice to come in and out. That was our goal. But then comes along, people find out about what you do, and people search for grass-free living, because here in the UK, because we have such fertile land and the weather really lends itself for growing lots of grass, many livery yards are situated on ex-dairy farms. So there's a lot of grass. So many horses here in the UK are suffering from laminitis, and many of them live their summer months, spring months, locked in stables. and maybe a sand pen or turnout in the menage if they are lucky. So to find a facility with large grass-free areas is really quite rare. So we had some horses and you start fixing them, and we put it on Facebook, and we've got the page which many people follow us, and you fix one or two horses and you become a bit of a magnet for all the sick horses in the UK. You've got to remember, a track system was created, the idea was created by James Jackson from America, Paddock Paradise. So we went off his concept. So if you put his concept into place, you do not need to be a lameness rehabilitation expert. If you give horses the tools they need and a species appropriate lifestyle, they will heal themselves with quite minimal input from us humans. You give them the correct diet, movement, freedom, surfaces to move over, everything else it all falls into place. And they just turn up, because we were putting all this money and work into it, because I was surfaced, so it took a lot of time and money. And I was thinking, what if nobody comes? And my mum kept saying to me, Bethan, don't worry, build it and they will come. And they did.
And so by surfaced, you obviously mean that you've put down different footing and in various areas of the track?
Yeah. So originally, like I say, it was 2018, I think. And it was a really hot summer. And so we were lucky. It was just a grass track, but all the grass got burnt off. It didn't rain for like 6 weeks, and it was super, super hot. So we were able to take some of the overweight horses with laminitis. We could take them. And every month we were able to buy a little bit more surface. So as we went along, we were just creeping and growing. We were to put a bit more surface down, a bit more surface down. So road planing, sand, crushed rock, crushed stone, all types of different aggregate. And eventually we got it fully surfaced.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I know how expensive that can be, because I had built a little track for my gelding, and just even buying a little bit of pea gravel. I'm not even sure if you call it pea gravel over there, but
yeah, pea gravel. Pea gravel travels, and if you can't keep it boxed in, it will just disappear and go very thin on the ground, and then it spills over onto concreted areas. This was our experience anyway. It spilled out onto like concreted areas, which then, because a horse standing on deep pea gravel, it moves and molds to the underside of the foot. But on concrete, if it's just one or two pieces, it can dig in, and it hurts. So, and we had vehicles going around our track, because it was a large track. So we had tractors and quad bikes and pickup trucks going around it to put hay out, to poo pick, to do repairs and everything else that goes along with it. It just moved. We couldn't keep it where it needed to be beneficial. So for it to be beneficial, it needs to be quite deep,
right,
for it to have the therapeutic qualities that are needed for it to be good for rehab. So if you can keep it and maintain it like that, it's brilliant. But if you can't, and we couldn't, because it was such a vast area, it just disappeared, and it was more hassle than it was worth.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you manage the mud? Do you just use the footing? Do you use any of those like mud mats?
Well, at the minute we have got the concrete sleepers over there, which are old concrete railway sleepers, which are like big, they're about 12 foot long, like big beams made of concrete that we put together, and they make big like islands. So where the feeding stations are, there are these big concrete feeding pads. So that's okay. I mean, the horses are fine in the mud, but we can't get round to poo pick, to put the hay out. It's just hard. It's just really difficult. So once we get our planning permission through, the field next door, it's a 12-acre field. That's where we're planning to have our new track. That will be fully surfaced. We'll have a brand new barn, a purpose-built barn this time. So our old barn was an old cattle shed. So this one will be purpose-built for the horses. And it's going to be a lot wider, the track is this time. It's going to be 8 metres wide, where it was only 4 metres before. And I've already bought the horse netting fencing, which is a lot safer for them. They can't get tangled up in it. They can't go through it. So yeah, it'll be a lot easier to sleep at night. No one's going to get tangled in any fences.
Right. Yeah. And so, these horses are coming in, and obviously, they're with you for a certain amount of time. What improvements have you seen while they're at your livery yard because of the tracks, or that you would attribute to the track?
So a lot of horses come to us laminitic, overweight, and they'll come to us very inflamed. So they'll have big crests, big hard crests. And what a lot of people don't notice is very swollen sheaths on the geldings. And it's amazing how many people don't realise this isn't healthy and it isn't normal. Horses should not have big swollen sheaths. It's not right. So within being grass-free within the first 7 days, we will notice that sheath will go down through being off the grass and through movement. And within 2 to 3 weeks, the neck crest will start to soften. Fat pads that were very hard will start to soften. And we have a minimum of 3 month stay. And you will notice from day 1 to the end of the 3 months, you will see a dramatic decrease in fat pads, hard crests and sheaths, and they will seem a lot happier and more comfortable in themselves.
And yeah, that's one huge thing that I've seen is a benefit to their body, and even just building up muscling too, because they're moving more. And obviously I've seen posts that you do about the feet, and can you talk a little bit about improvements you see in their feet?
Yeah, so many horses come to us, they've been shod, they've lived a life in a stable and a small, some of them live in just post-stamp sized paddocks on their own. Some of them are more lucky, they go out in groups or herds. They'll get hacked, some of them, but they do not get the exposure to the different surfaces that are needed to have a healthy functioning foot. So some of the navicular horses that we get, what we see is with all of them is the back of the foot is pretty much non-existent. So there's like no digital cushion. The frog is usually shriveled and narrow, and the pedal bones, they can be very broken back and negative palm angles. So when they go out on the surfaces, that stimulation from the different surfaces, we will see it happen quite rapidly. Within the first month, you'll start to see the digital cushion regenerating, the frogs widen, the horses become more comfortable, and the whole structure of the foot will change. And this can still happen even with boots on. We use equine fusion boots, and the horses will still get the stimulation from the surfaces, even through the boots, from the extra movement and walking around and being on those different surfaces.
Wow, yeah. I think most of us know rehab takes time. We all wish it was instantaneous, but like with human injury and pathology, horses need to heal, strengthen, and build up other areas of their hoof and body to compensate for weak areas. None of us like to see horses sore or uncomfortable, and I think that's why a lot of us got into hoof rehab in the first place. We want long-standing soundness. Bethan also stresses how she worries about horses during rehab, and there are lots of ups and downs. She mentioned having a 3-month minimum stay on the track system to give the horses a chance to heal, while also watching their movement carefully, using boots and pads as needed, and letting them carefully work through their injuries and pathologies at their own pace, like physical therapy. And actually, something you said made me think of another question. So you mentioned that you have a minimum of a 3-month stay. And what's the average amount of time that horses are there? Or is it like a permanent livery that they stay there?
Some stay with us forever. Some come to us just because they want a more natural way of life. There's nothing wrong with them. They just want a more natural way of life. Some come just for 3 months because that's all the insurance will pay. Every horse is different, but I do say a minimum of 3 months. Because in the beginning, I'd never run a track system. There's no handbook really to go along with running a track system livery yard in the UK. So you have to be very careful not to become a bed and breakfast type thing. People just are using you as a stopgap.
Yeah.
So that was the original reason for putting in the 3 month stay, because a lot goes into integrating a horse into the herd. A lot of work from us and keeping them safe, because it's the hardest part of running a track system is introducing new horses to the herd, because no matter how wide you make it or how big a track system is, it is still a restricted environment. It is so hard emotionally and it's mentally draining. I lose sleep over it. These people ring me up and they're desperate. We are sometimes the last port of call for people. And, these horses have been through everything. These owners have nurtured them and nursed them through so much. And then they've micromanaged every aspect of the life. They've been weighing hay and every feed and supplement and this and that and the other. And they hand this horse over to me and I have to integrate it into this track system with sometimes 20 other horses.
Right.
And it's scary. But at the old track, we had the barn that we could put pens in. We had a gate system that when the gates were opened, it created these big holding pens. So they would stay in there for a time until they seemed settled. And then we would let them out. And we've had, I can't even count, 40 horses in and out through our track. And touch wood, we've never had any real serious injuries. But then you've got to remember, for you and I, horses living in a herd is normal. I see horses with scuffs and scrapes and bite marks and kick marks, but they're not really, they haven't broken the skin, the kick marks. Where they haven't got shoes on, we've never had a broken leg or anything like that. But I try to tell owners and prepare them for what could happen, and it's written in the contract that there's a list of things that can happen to your horse. They can run through a fence, they can jump through a fence, they can try to jump through a fence and not make it and get tangled up in it. Another horse can bite them, take a big chunk out of them. They can have hair, bits of mane ripped out of them. These are things that can and do happen. But I always say to them, what you've come from is your horse living in a box about to die. So it's you've got to make a decision on what you want to do. And many owners, they say they can deal with it, but the reality of it when it happens is they can't.
Yeah.
And then we get blamed for it. And our name is, mud, and we're terrible people. But I do try to explain to people and owners, we try to keep them as safe as possible. But once we let them off that head collar and we go to bed at night, because we can't walk around with them constantly, we don't have control and we don't know what's going to happen. But, we have cameras on them. We try to be there and watch them as much as possible. But there are times when you just can't be there and things do happen. And it is just something that's taken a long time for me to be able to deal with. And I speak to all the track system owners, and this is one of the biggest issues, should I say.
Yeah. And, obviously all that integration takes so much consideration and time. And I totally understand why you want them there at least a few months, not even just for that, but because the worst thing is somebody to drop their horse off and then see them in the middle of a part of their rehab and think things aren't going well and just take them out and think it's failed when they just really haven't done it long enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I've had this. We had a horse and he had everything. His feet it was the end of the road for this horse. Navicular, negative palm angles, all these problems. And he came in wedgies, pads. I think he had heart bars. I can't remember if he had heart bars on or not. Screws, wood and screws into his feet and casts on his feet the feet were totally immobilized. And he
Yeah.
came with these things on his feet. And within 3 weeks, we saw a huge change in him. The feet were coming on so well. But this horse came from a big fancy dressage yard. And, living out with our lot, they've got to rough it a bit, and they got dirty, and he was playing, and he did really well. But one of the main things we have with rehabbing hooves is they can abscess. We do see quite a lot of abscesses with the restructuring of the foot, especially laminitis. And this horse was going through an abscess, and the owner came, and she didn't like it, and she came with a box and picked him up and took him away, and that was that. And it was heartbreaking.
Yeah. It's hard because it's sort of, if we're used to seeing this process and, knowing how long it takes, it's hard when an owner is just wanting a result. And that's true just even in trimming, as what I do now is that things take time and we can't always say how long it'll be or exactly what the process will look like. But we know, in most of the cases, they go from here to here, a much better spot.
Yeah, and I tried to explain as well, the majority of the time they can get worse before they get better as well.
Yeah.
Especially if a horse has come with shoes on, I do say there is an adjustment period. This horse is going to look uncomfortable for a little while when the shoes come off. We put boots on them, but like I say, especially with laminitis, they can abscess, and there's lots of sole and frog can shed, and it can be quite alarming. But it's so hard sometimes to get it through to people that this is part of the process and you've got to stick with it. But majority do stick with it, and it is the minority that pull the plug.
And so, with that being said, about, you put all this time into having them on a track, they get better. Can they go back to a normal boarding situation, or should these horses be on a track for the rest of their life?
We have got some that you could never go back. But when we say normal, this is what track systems are trying to achieve and get the message across. The way we keep horses is not correct. It's not species appropriate. Yeah. It's not. It shouldn't be the norm. That shouldn't be normal. If you look at a human prison complex and look at a traditional livery yard, there are very, very few differences. The horses live in cells. They get taken out for exercise. They get put in pens for exercise. So, even some of these fancy stables have feed pot bowls that like come out of the stable, and then you put the dumps of food in it and it spins round and goes back into the stable. So you don't even have to walk into the stable. And it's like, why are we keeping horses like this? Why would we do that? There's all these adverts out there about dogs being kept in kennels, in shelters, in dogs' home, and everyone hates dogs living like that, and they're so desperate for dogs to be adopted into homes. But we do this to horses. We keep them in these boxes and deny them the social interaction that they're genetically programmed for, which is how they feel safe and secure. And then we wonder why horses behave so badly, and we wonder why we walk into livery yards and through American barns, the setup of an American barn, and horses are lunging over the gates, over the doors with the ears back, trying to bite people, trying to bite each other. They're kicking and squealing at the walls. And people are blind and deaf to it now. They don't see it. I hate going to a traditional livery yard now because I just see horses. If horses could cry and whimper like a dog, we wouldn't do it to them.
And honestly, one thing that I always tell owners is that, if they're looking for healthier feet on their horses, movement to me has trumped everything that I have focused on. Yeah. I have seen horses that have been perfectly managed in every single way, and they don't get enough movement and their feet show it. Whereas I've seen horses that have not been managed in other ways, like maybe their diet's not perfect, or maybe they're not, handled as much as I want, or their feet don't get picked as much as I would like. And their feet are so much better because they get continuous movement all the time over different surfaces. And it's like they're their foot almost takes care of itself, almost like a horse would in the wild. Like they don't have their
Yeah.
feet picked out. They don't have a perfect
No.
diet, but they're moving so much that their feet have to develop.
Yeah,
So,
that's it. This is exactly it. It's the foot is like a muscle, and if that muscle can't operate how it's supposed to operate, it will atrophy, it will shrivel up, and it won't be as it should be, and it won't be healthy, and it won't be strong. The digital cushion shrivels up, the frogs shrivel up, and then the internal structures aren't supported the way they're supposed to be supported, and everything starts to break down. And then this is where all these lameness issues are coming from. And I remember being on traditional livery yards, and every other horse had a pulled tendon or a suspensory ligament problem. And it was because horses are locked up in boxes for hours, days at a time, and especially in the winter. And then they get turned out on cold legs. They go charging around in mud, sliding everywhere, and they pull something or damage something, strain something. And this is where we get all these injuries. On our track, touch wood again, we don't see this. We don't see these injuries. We very rarely see horses charging around on the track.
yeah.
It's not a normal. We don't see horses hooning around. We don't really. The horses on tracks tend to move around more quietly. We get it occasionally, but then whereas horses in fields, you're getting that bringing in, turning out, bringing in, turning out, and there's a bring in time. It's carnage at the gate. There's horses trying to kill each other. They're in deep mud, biting, kicking at each other, and then they're turned out and they go racing down the field into the fence, sliding into the fence. We don't get that. We don't have those problems.
Some people build tracks just for improved movement, to build top line, or to have horses lose weight. Many of us with a hoof focus, though, want to see healthier feet and lameness rehabilitated. I asked Bethan for her routine and process when new horses arrive to her track and what she does to set them up for success.
Yeah.
But I know that you've touched upon it like the whole time we were talking, but can you comment a little bit on what kind of cases you see coming in for rehab and how when they come in, what's their normal like initiation? Do they get their shoes pulled? Do they, go on a specific diet, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we have laminitis coming in, navicular cases coming in, mystery lameness issues coming in. So straight away they are in our barn in one of the pens, and if they've got shoes on, our trimmer comes out. Chris Simpson, he's wonderful. He's been with us from the beginning. I would never use anybody else. He comes out, we take the shoes off, and we tend not to take any foot off when the shoes first come off. We don't do a trim because of our surfaces. Like I say, there is an adjustment period, so the horses need that extra bit of foot that they've got to keep them more comfortable. And we assess how comfortable they are. Some horses can go straight out on the track without boots. Some need boots. And we are very kindly sponsored by Equine Fusion, so they supply us with lots of boots, which is great. This is another issue with owners that we encounter quite a lot. Owners come to us and it's like, oh, he's on this supplement and that supplement and this feed and that feed. And we detox everything from the diet. We will not give them anything for a while. We just want to, especially the laminitics, we want to just detox everything, and then we'll slowly bring things back in. Because sometimes it can be in the feed. We have stopped owners bringing their own feed because we find that they were just feeding stuff that wasn't really helping the horses, and a lot of supplements that are just a waste of money, waste of time, and they weren't really doing anything. So they will stay in the barn for however long. I feel some horses seem really settled straight away. Some are, they need a bit more time. It can be 2 days up to 2 weeks. And the pens, we had 2 pens, so we would take it in turns. We would put a different horse in next to them until we found one that was quite a good pal with them. And then the gate in the middle, which separated the 2 pens, we would open so it would make one huge pen. So then the new horse and one of our herd horses would pal up with them, and eventually we would let them out. And yeah, they go off around the track and they eat And then our trimmer will come and reassess them again in a couple of weeks, and we'll do a tidy up trim. And most of the time, we see, even without them being trimmed by our trimmer, we see a dramatic change in the hoof shape. The horse will wear off a lot of the hoof that they no longer need. We've seen horses come in with nail holes going quite high up, and then by the time our trimmer comes back out, the nail holes are totally gone because the hoof is worn and exfoliated to where it naturally would be. And it makes you wonder, all these horses have been walking around on feet they were the wrong shape for them.
And have you had any cases that have really surprised you? Like they came in and you were, unsure if, how they would come along, and they really did well?
Yeah, so Dolly 2, she was a laminitic, and she had a severe rotation in her front left hoof, and the owner contacted me, and this mare had been on 7 months of box rest already. She sent me a picture of the x-ray, and the pedal bone was like a mil from coming through the sole. I'd shown the x-rays to vets, and they were like, Bethan, do not take this horse on. They won't even be able to travel it to you. It won't get to you. Its pedal bone will be through its foot by the time it gets to you. There's no point in even trying. And I was quite reluctant to take this horse, but the owner was desperate. So we took it on, and the horse turned up, and she was very overweight, and the feet were a real mess. I thought we were going to take these shoes off, and it's going to go out on the track. And I even thought that the surfaces would pierce her paper thin sole. It was terrifying, to be honest with you. We did put boots on her, but she did well. And we noticed within 2 or 3 weeks of being with us, just underneath the coronet band came a very, very sharp, deep indentation, which seemed it was like the new growth coming through.
Yeah.
But it seemed really, really steep, and we didn't know what it was, and we were so concerned. But what it was, because we've got the diet and lifestyle correct, the pedal bone, lamina, and hoof wall finally all connected and pulled itself all back where it should be. And then that line, that indentation, that new growth line, that healing angle, we call it, over the months grew down. The huge lamina wedge grew out, and we went lots of ups and downs, because I always say to people, rehab and recovery is not linear. It doesn't go from point A to point B in a straight line, not very often anyway. There's ups, there's downs, it's 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. And Dolly did relapse a little bit with, we had to worm her because she had a worm burden, and the wormer, and probably the worms dying in her gut, caused some kind of toxicity, and it set her back. And there was a point where I thought we were going to lose her, but we brought her back again. And after 5 months of being with her, we had her re-x-rayed. And it was really quite nerve-wracking, because she'd been quite sore, and I was worried that the rotation had come back, or it's rotated again. And in my mind, I was convinced I was going to look on the x-ray and see the pedal bone crumbling away, demineralizing. Yeah. But lo and behold, she had about 1.5 centimeters of thick sole. The pedal bone was in the correct alignment, the correct place, and she was doing really, really well. And she's gone from strength to strength, and she's still with us now, doing really well. But I don't think this is one that will never be able to go back to living on grass. So her owners do live quite far away, but they're happy for her to be with us and know she's safe.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, that was kind of my last wrap-up question.
You do. I follow your page, and you do great. And getting the horses' diet right, changing the diet, and getting the movement. The number one benefit. You've got to get the horse moving. We've had horses come with holes in tendons, and where the traditional therapy would be box rest. and we've had them on a track moving, and they've been rescanned, and the hole's closed up. So horses, even with holes in their tendons, can recover whilst moving on a track system.
Right.
So it's not, even these injuries where people would say, oh, it's got to be box rest. It doesn't always have to be box rest, and there are alternatives. And there's people like yourself and me, other track system owners, Rockley Farm, that are pushing for this species appropriate way of living. And we need to get people and owners asking and demanding for this way of living, because if they don't ask for it, nobody will supply it. It's a supply and demand, basically.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think this was really great. Well, thank you so much.
Lovely. Okay, no worries.
Have a great rest of your day.
And you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I always say that I'm slightly more hoof obsessed than the average person, and chances are, if you're listening to a hoof care podcast, you are too. So we should probably be friends. Feel free to find me on Facebook or email me at thehumblehoof@gmail.com.